It's Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022. My name is Ashton, Ellett, Politics and Public Policy Archivist at the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Washington, D.C. with Mr. Robert Schramm for a Russell Library oral history documentary interview. Mr. Schramm is a graduate of the University of Georgia and served as legislative assistant to Senator Herman Talmadge. Following his stint on Senator Talmadge's staff, Bob went on to a lengthy career in government affairs. He's currently the principal of the Washington-based Schramm, Williams and Associates. Thank you, Bob, for taking some time to talk history and about your time in government. We really appreciate it. And we also appreciate Randy Knuckles and everybody here at Denton's for their hospitality and willingness to host us. So thank you to them as well.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. We're very excited and very happy you were willing to sit down with us. Let's start. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing. You know, listeners will notice that you don't have the quintessential Georgia drawl.
Well, I was born in New York, raised in Queens, in southern Queens, and a lot of people don't realize it, but close to me was 80-head dairy farm, a truck farm over by Aqueduct Racetrack, and beyond that became Idlewild Airport, eventually named Kennedy Airport.
Okay.
And my mother's side of the family farmed in Pennsylvania. And when I was growing up at that age, because I was born in 1938, we had the polio scare in the middle 1940s up until 1950. And I was sent to the farm each summer after the World War II finished. And that's where I'd spend the summers and took a great interest in agriculture.
Interesting.
And so when it came time to go to high school, New York City literally had an agriculture high school called Newtown High School, had a 35-acre farm, had everything on the farm that agriculture would need, tractors, even had horses, had hogs, chickens.
What part of New York City would this have been?
This was in Queens, and it was next to Queens College.
Okay.
And eventually Queens College did absorb that acreage.
Sure.
But so the degree was, the high school degree had everything but a language, so it was an academic degree.
So tell me, you split your time between New York City and Pennsylvania. Did you grow up in a family that you would describe as politically active, involved, or attuned?
No. My father was self-employed. He was in plumbing and heating. And at dinner time, there was one other sibling, my sister, who was 6 years older than I was. But at the dinner table, my mother and father would discuss current events and politics. And I thoroughly enjoyed current events in high school.
So tell me, how did you make your way down to Georgia from Queens, New York?
I forget exactly how that evolved, but we had a group of us that was interested in going someplace other than New York State. Mm-hmm. And we decided one weekend, 5 of us would jump in an automobile and go down to Athens. I don't know whether there was a recruitment in the high school. I forget how this evolved.
Okay.
But 5 of us did travel down, and 4 of us did apply, and 4 of us were accepted into the university. And I decided, obviously, College of Agriculture was the college I wanted to attend.
So you wanted to study agriculture. What were your future job goals? What were you thinking about? I started
out literally in dairy science. I thought I wanted to go into dairy science, and I actually milked the university's herd on weekends so that the herdsmen could have weekends off.
Now, where was the dairy farm at that time?
It was on River Road, just outside of, I guess it was still within Athens, but it was on River Road.
Okay.
And I was in Reed Hall, and I remember getting up very cold mornings at 4 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays, going down there to milk the cows. Oof. And I remember even going to football games and excusing my date that I had to go milk the cows at the end of the football, and then hoping my classmates, a fraternity brother, didn't snake my girlfriend.
Well, maybe some things have changed at the university, but I think that's probably maybe a concern.
But as I got involved, I as I mentioned, my parents are into economics a lot also.
Right.
I decided I want to switch into agriculture economics. So I literally, minored in dairy science, but got my major in agriculture economics.
So agriculture economics was separate from the business school's economics?
Yes, at
Okay.
that time, yes.
Okay. So, it sounds like you were pretty busy during your 4 years or so in
Yes.
Athens. Were you involved in campus politics? Do you remember politics on campus during that time?
Became a member of the Sigma Nu fraternity.
Sigma Nu, I believe that was Senator Talmadge.
It was, and eventually became treasurer and then commander.
Okay.
I was not involved per se in campus politics other than the fraternity politics.
Okay. So, well, there is a very long tradition of Georgia politics growing out of interfraternity council
Yes,
and
yes.
everything. Still true to this day. So did you go straight from undergrad into law school, or did you have a break?
No. At that time, individuals my age, we had to serve in the military.
Okay. Right, you
And,
mentioned Air National Guard? or-
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Tell me
And-
about that experience.
Well, I had a big decision to make. My mother was dying of cancer at that time, and I realized if I went into the military, I would probably not see her except for the last week of her life. And I knew she was going to live for another year. The other option was to go into the Air National Guard, which would allow me to go basic training and then just do weekends once a month. And I opted to go into the Georgia Air National Guard.
Right.
That allowed me each month to fly back to New York to see my mother during that time. So I postponed going to law school for 1 year.
Okay. And you said you were based down at St. Simon's at some point.
There was probably 4 or 5 air bases in Georgia that they had the Air National Guard stationed, and it was in great demand at that time, obviously, the slots, and I was able to get a slot in St. Simon's. And that's kind of the reason why St. Simon's didn't want to release me, because they trained me for basic training, and I had almost a year of weekends with them.
Right.
But then I was able to switch to Dobbins Air Force Base.
In Cobb County.
Yes.
So from there, once you fulfilled your service, did you always, again, you had been agriculture, ag economics. Why the path to law school?
I realized a lot of economists just look at statistics, but no, I got more. I was always very interested in politics per se,
Right.
and one thing I failed to tell you. While in undergraduate school, I was an exchange student to Israel.
Interesting.
And agriculture exchange student.
Oh yeah.
And that part of the reason I got an interest in law is I viewed law as part of international.
Okay.
And I think that's probably way greater than any other reason why I decided to go to law school.
What was that experience like in Israel? And this would have been in the 1950s?
It was 59-60.
Okay.
1959-60, only 14 years after the end of World War II.
Right.
It was very interesting. I went to Israel on called the Zion ship. There was probably, I guess, 30 Jewish students going to study in Israel, and I was the only Christian in that group. Great crowd, thoroughly enjoyed them. I would travel to Jerusalem several times to visit with them, which was a beautiful city, and it's still a beautiful city. I've been back 4 times on business since then. And no, it was great. It was a wonderful experience.
Well, were you based? Did you stay
No,
at local farms? Or?
The Israeli agriculture is built under 3 different programs: Moshav, Moshava, and kibbutzim. Moshav is independence. Moshava is kind of a co-op.
Okay.
And then the kibbutzim is communal living. And so I was stationed in different entities.
To learn about
yes,
each
yes.
one of them.
And I was managed from the agriculture faculty in Rehovot.
Okay. So you go into law school. Was there an international law focus, or is it just one of those things
Yeah,
where you
that-
get your JD and there was no Rusk Center of International
That's right.
Law?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
None whatsoever.
So you get your law degree. You do your 3-year stint in law school in 1960.
Actually, I went summers.
Okay. You
My
powered
family
through.
my family was not wealthy.
Okay.
I would say we were low middle income family, and so I paid for my schooling, my law school completely, and I had different jobs on campus. And if I stopped to say take the summer off, those jobs would not be
Right.
there. And so I continued during the summer times.
So you wrapped up as quickly as possible.
Yes, yes.
Because you were paying your own dime.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw in the Constitution that you graduated the same year as Herman Talmadge Jr. Was that a misprint?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. It answers the second part of that question, whether you
Yeah.
knew each other while you were there.
That,
So the
that must
answer's
be a
no.
misprint because,
Okay.
yeah.
So you clerked for Jephthah Tanksley. in
Judge
Ful-
Jephthah Tanksley.
Was he a Democrat at the time? Because later on he ran for governor.
He was a Georgia Democrat.
Okay.
Same leanings as what the senator had.
Sure.
He was the oldest of 13 children.
Wow.
Born in North Georgia. Went to North Georgia College, I believe, and finished 2 years, and then went to West Point, and graduated from West Point, and was in a battle in Italy, and was wounded, lost a leg and an eye,
Wow.
and came back.
So he has a fascinating story.
Wonderful human being.
Yeah.
Great. Judge Tanksley was outstanding.
Tell me about that experience on the Superior Court. Very, that's,
Well, it was very practical.
Right.
It's a court of original jurisdiction,
Right.
and you had criminal cases, you had domestic cases, civil cases. At that time, there was a lot of eminent domain with reference to the interstate highway,
Sure.
and so we had several cases involving that. Observed some great litigators, some poor litigators.
Which one were more interesting?
Tony
entertaining?
Alimo. I don't
Oh,
know if you
yeah.
came across, who was a judge, a federal
right.
judge who lived in St. Simons. He was a classmate of Judge Tanksley's.
Okay.
And most interesting man, came out of Ohio and graduated #1, I believe, from Emory Law School. Could not get a job, and Reuben Garland, who was a outstanding litigator, plaintiff attorney, he went with that firm.
Yeah, Judge Alimo, the dissertation I wrote on the Georgia Republican Party, he makes an appearance as very strong Republican. Like you said, came from Ohio, brought those leanings with him, and
Yes.
I believe it was Richard Nixon who appointed him to the federal bench, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah,
I forget.
but
But I had some interesting conversations with him in the chambers.
right.
And then by accident, I did visit with him at the Red Barn on St. Simons.
Oh,
He
yeah.
popped in to pick up some food to take home, and
A culinary landmark that's still operating. I can attest to that.
yes.
So your clerkship
Was
what
a
pro-
year and a half.
Okay.
And then how I got with the senator is that our secretary was friends of the current legislative assistant, John Van Sant, and she told me that John Van Sant was leaving. And I said, well, I looked at the senator. He was on the Agriculture Committee. He was on the Finance Committee, which was mostly tax and trade. I said, well, I'll just send a letter. And I sent a letter, and about, I guess, 2.5, 3 weeks later, I get a phone call from the senator asking if I would like to come down, visit with him in Lovejoy on the farm, and spend a day with him. And this was in April.
April of '66.
Yes. And
So you send him a letter and say, "Brother Talmadge, this is your." This is
no, it was a very,
fraternity."
it was a very formal letter.
Sure.
Dear Senator Talmadge, I didn't indicate that I knew that he was losing somebody. I wanted to.
Oh,
not-
sure.
And I just laid out my background, and
So tell me about that day on the farm. That sounds like a really interesting, not necessarily trial, but a way to get to know.
Well, I had my vehicle was a 1957 Volkswagen, and this was 1966, and that was the most economical car I could drive.
Sure.
And so I drove down on the farm, and Betty Talmadge was with him, and we had a very nice visit in the living room discussing it. And then he invited me to travel up to North Georgia, where he was going to give a speech to on behalf of Judge Davis, and I forget what county it was. And we drove up to the farm, to the county. He gave his speech. It was a luncheon speech. Mm-hmm. Then we drove back, and he asked me at that time, would I join him? And I said, absolutely. I'd find it a privilege to do it. And he says, well, I'd like for you to start August 1st. Could you do it then? I said, yes, I would do it August 1st. Well, between April and August is when the primary was being held for being governor.
Right.
And
Very
Lester
famous.
Maddox looked like he was going to win, and Bo Calloway was in the running. And the Democrats did not want a Republican because it looked like Bo Calloway was going to win. And so I guess it might have been in May, June, when it hit the press, and a lot of individuals, the political types, wanted Talmadge
That's
to
right.
come back and run.
That's right.
But the business community, because of his position on the finance committee, mainly, came together and said, no, we need you in Washington. And then Lester Maddox did win.
Right. So obviously you were familiar with Senator Talmadge and his politics and everything like that. Would you say they matched your own at the time?
Well, he asked me, he in the drive up, he said, if you don't mind me asking, who'd you vote for? And I said, I voted for Barry Goldwater. And I remember him saying, well, I have an inkling Gene did also. and there was Barry Goldwater came back into the Senate while I was with Talmadge. He was elected in '68, and Talmadge and Barry Goldwater got along very well.
Right. Yeah, Senator Goldwater served well into the 80s, I believe. He was there a long time.
Yeah, yes.
So you joined up in 1966. You grew up in New York City, so you had lived in a city before. So, but what was D.C. like back in the late 60s?
It was well. Let me share something with you.
Absolutely.
Looking at the last senior senator from Georgia who had any longevity or seniority, Chambliss, mm-hmm. I figured he had probably between Washington, D.C. and the state offices, he had about 55 staffers. When I went to work for Herman Talmadge, there was 13 of us. We had no state offices. 3 men, administrative assistant, press secretary, legislative assistant, 10 secretaries. And I know all of my successors will say that our legislative secretary should have been the legislative assistant. She was so good. She was the one that trained us on this. We did work the 3 years. 1 year we went home in October, and I remember it was October 23rd. It was a beautiful day, and I jumped in the Volkswagen and went down because we opened up an office in Atlanta in a company that would rent an office, and I would go to that office every day, and the senator would come into the office maybe once or twice a week for a couple of hours, and then be out in the state giving speeches. Mm-hmm. The other 2 years we finished in December. The ratio was probably 65-35 with reference to Republicans and Democrats, mm-hmm. and there was a lot of legislation. There was a lot of debates going on. to get into the, I remember I used to take dates if there was going to be a good debate in the evenings. I would just walk into the Capitol, go upstairs. There would be a doorman at the door, and I walk into the gallery, and we'd sit there and listen to the debates. Everett Dirksen was a great debater. John Williams from Delaware was a great debater. Jacob Javits from New York was a great debater. And so it was relatively quiet. It was. Then we had Martin Luther King assassinated.
So April '68.
Yes, and we had martial law. And then several months later, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in L.A. And so things changed at that time. I do remember I had living across the street. I purchased a house at 3rd and A, just behind the Supreme Court, northeast. And across the street from me was Bill Cochran, who was from North Carolina. And he was chief of staff of the Rules Committee that had jurisdiction over the buildings, the Capitol, the Senate side of the Capitol. And I visited with Bill, and I said, Bill, I'm concerned about the lack of security in these buildings, and the fact that, for example, I would go to the Senate floor and I would just sign my name and I'd walk onto the Senate floor. There was no prohibitions for us at that time. And so I said, Bill, this is a security problem here, in my opinion. He says, no, I think we're okay. And about 3 months later, on the 2nd floor of the Senate side, a bomb went off at 2 a.m. in the morning. And they accused a woman, but they never had the evidence she might have been indicted, but she was never tried for this. And so it started going down at that time.
Was this the time of the Weather Underground?
Exactly.
And that sort of
exactly. It was the Weatherman.
milieu?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. It was.
So, you mentioned, your home and everything. Is this the home with the famous vacant lot or the junkyard next?
When I first moved there, I had a good friend who worked for a house house member who said, when you come to Washington, live up on Capitol Hill. Well, when I came, I didn't know where I was. In fact, George Watts, who was editor of the Black and White, and was a roommate of mine for a period of time in Athens. I did use his apartment for one night, and then I found a place down in Georgetown, and it was too far, and so I moved up on Capitol Hill. And then the fellow who was renting this 2-bedroom house across the street didn't have a roommate, and so I moved in with him. And economics didn't take too long to realize that I might be able to buy this building because what the rent was, I could pay for the mortgage. And so I was able to borrow $2,000 from a bank on Signature in Atlanta, and it was $18,000 for the house, and I bought it. And there was this Capitol Hill, we heated by coal. And so about every 6 or 7 blocks, we had a lot where a coal company would store the coal, and they would deliver the coal to the house.
I see.
So this property was actually owned by Marlow Coal Company, but leased by the Supreme Court for their parking lot. And it was probably my neighbors putting the junk there, but it was just a mess. There would be mattresses sitting there and everything. And so for about 9 months, I kept on calling E. Perry Lippett, who was the marshal, saying, you got to do something here. And he'd blow me off all the time. So I had lunch with a tax court judge because Talmadge was on the finance committee one Sunday.
Right.
And he says, well, you should sue the Supreme Court. I said, I got an idea. So I researched and found out you didn't sue all the justices, just the Chief Justice, who was Earl Warren at that time, that did not have a good reputation in the South. So I went to see the senator, and I said, listen, I'm planning to do this. Do you have any objection? He says, no, go ahead and do it. And I did it. And the government has 60 days to respond. And on the 60th day, they brought in all the equipment, cleaned it up. But I didn't drop the lawsuit. I had my first hearing, and the Department of Interior represents the Supreme Court. and the judge wouldn't drop the suit. And so I said, okay, I'll reach a settlement. And
Well, let that be a lesson to everybody. Don't mess with Bob Schramm.
no. When you work in the Senate, you have a lot of paper that comes your way, and at that time we didn't have, obviously, the digital world didn't exist, and so it was always paper, and that was it. And I remember receiving a study that was done, I believe it was by the University of South Dakota Political Science Office, College, and they compared all 100 senators' voting records with each other. And it was fascinating where Talmadge, who voted with him and who voted against him, and vice versa.
Right.
And the one senator that voted with him the most was Everett Jordan from North Carolina. And Everett Jordan came out of the textile industry, a very fine individual. And we would commonly sit with the senators on the Senate floor in a lower chair, smaller chair, but next to the senators when there was issues that the senator was interested in. And frequently, Everett Jordan would come up, Senator Jordan would come up to Talmadge and say, "Herman, how are you going to vote on this?" I'll always remember that. The senator he voted with the least was Jacob Javits from New York.
I believe that.
But I will say that Jacob Javits was he did his homework, and he represented his interests well. But that's how it was.
He matched up with Everett Jordan because Everett Jordan wanted to be matched up with Herman Talmadge.
Yes.
All right, so tell me, you're talking about how the office runs and the operations of the office. Who else? You mentioned there were a few people on staff when you came on. Who was the AA or the chief of staff when you were?
I apologize. He was a former, and I have directories going back to 1967, but it stopped there. He left. I believe he left. At the end of '66, he was a former newspaper reporter, wonderful human being, just great, very good. And at that time, Bo Genn came on as administrative assistant.
So tell me about Bo Genn. What was he like?
Well, Bo was chief of staff or administrative assistant for the congressman for Savannah, Georgia, and he understood Washington, D.C., understood how to run an office. He was extremely fair, did not get involved in legislation, ran the office, good person, very good person.
What was Senator Talmadge like as a boss?
Always, because we were so small, I always had access.
Sure.
My office was one removed from his. And I always had ability to see him. All visits were very brief. We had a saying that he wanted his memos 1 page long, triple space, third grade language. Did not like a lot of language, didn't like long memos as this describes. And when you went in, you had to get your message across to him very quickly. He also had, if somebody called from the state and he wanted to talk to the senator and he was in the room, he would listen to him. And he was outstanding in reference to dismissing or finishing a conversation real quick. One thing that I don't know if he continued doing this, but in 1968, he started the practice of calling. It was approximately 1,200 individuals in the state to say that, to inform them that he was running for re-election and he was counting on their support. And we would do that on Saturdays and we'd do that on Sundays. And on Sundays, he would be contacting the African American community because that was the days they were off. He would call commissioners, he would call sheriffs in each county, as you know, the 159 counties. But I would be with him all the time. And so if someone came up and said, Senator, then we had the secretary, the receptionist, would place the phone call, said, Senator Talmadge is calling you, could you please hold? Meanwhile, Senator Talmadge is talking to that person. And the constituent may say, the senator would say, is there anything I can do for you? Yes, I haven't gotten my Social Security payment. Just 1 minute. I got my Social Security expert on here. Let me have him talk to you. So then he'd transfer him to me, and then he would pick up on the one that was holding. Now, the next person may say, well, I want my son to come back from San Francisco, who's stationed there with the Navy, for Christmas. Can you help me? I happen to have my Pentagon expert there. Let me just have him talk to you. And so that's how we would get through 30, 40 phone calls. It was amazing.
I mean, that's an operation. I dare say it doesn't work that way these days.
The other thing also was, when I worked there, we were expected to work a half-day Saturday. And I would come in at 7:30 and wait until he left. And if they were in until 8, 9 o'clock at night, I would be there. My predecessor, two removed, I was told would come in at 9 in the morning and would leave at 5. And I don't know how he did it.
Well, Senator Talmadge was famously an early riser.
Yes.
3 a.m.,
Yes.
4 a.m.
Yes.
Up. Was he in the office?
I would
Very
get there.
punctual.
I would get there at 7:30, the latest, and then I would frequently beat him.
Mm-hmm. You never had to go on one of his famous 4 a.m. jogs, did you?
No. But he seldom used the elevator, and we were up on the 3rd floor of the Russell office building, and so he would walk between the Capitol over into the Russell building and then walk up. So you're talking 4 floors walking up with him, and that's where he
got
you exercise there.
He got his steps in.
And he was very gracious. I mean, if you were with him and a senator came up, he would always introduce me to the senator. Always. It was never ignoring me.
You weren't just ornamentation
That's
or
right.
something.
That's
like
right.
Well, we mentioned off camera his interactions with some of those senators. What was his interaction with Senator Russell like? Were you able to observe that?
Well, Senator Russell was chairman. It was just before I arrived. Byrd was chairman and stepped down, and Russell Long took over. It might have been a year or something of that nature. And so Russell Long was new as chairman of that, and Talmadge would support Russell Long objectives. This brings to my mind, we were talking earlier about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. Mm-hmm. Frank Mankiewicz was the press secretary for Bobby Kennedy.
Okay.
And I remember one of the networks interviewing Frank Mankiewicz on national TV, evening news. And the question was, who did Bobby Kennedy respect in the Senate? And he said, Senator Abe Ribicoff, who was from Connecticut, and Herman Talmadge. And that made me feel so proud. That really, I was so proud to hear that.
Two Democrats, more different policy-wise.
But he served on the Finance Committee, Abe Ribicoff, and Talmadge had the greatest respect for him. They worked very well together.
So you mentioned Russell Long. What about Dick Russell, Richard Russell from
Georgia? That was enjoyable. I want to share something with you. This is just interesting. We had the I think it was I'm almost sure it was 1968. We had the War on Poverty, right. And they had the Resurrection City that was down over where Martin Luther King's memorial is right now along the Potomac River. And they had the tents and they set it up. And obviously the individuals came up and visited all the offices, especially the southern offices. And they came, made the appointment with Senator Talmadge, and Senator Talmadge asked me to be there with him. And a group came in, it might have been, 20, and they all stood around and they were complaining about minimum wage and that they weren't getting enough money. And Senator Talmadge says, "Let me tell you something. When I was your age, I was making pennies an hour, and I had croaker burlap bags on my knees, crawling through the fields doing my work." So they leave Senator Talmadge's office. They go down to see Senator Russell, and Powell Moore was his press secretary at that time, and Powell Moore was in the office with Senator Russell. And so they give the same message to Senator Russell, and Senator Russell said, "Let me tell you, when I was your age, I was only make pennies an hour, and I had burlap bags wrapped around my knees." And one of the visitors said, "Well, you must have worked on the same farm that Herman Talmadge worked on."
So you mentioned the war on poverty. You know, this is the war on poverty, the hunger crusades, or at this time with McGovern and Hubert Humphrey.
They crashed the Finance Committee hearing also, and Russell Long said some things that weren't really nice, but the police came in and got them out.
Sure, yeah. Sure. So you're a legislative assistant. How you've mentioned the Finance Committee, the Ag Committee. How does this is a technical question, I guess. How does the legislative assistant, at least at that time, work with the committee staffs and the main?
Well, the committee staff is basically the reference for you. They're the ones that, if the senator has a question, you go to committee staff. Now, you also had the Library of Congress. Perhaps if I had worked there for 5 years, 6 years, I might have been more involved in the Library of Congress. We call it now Congressional Research Service.
Right.
I might have been more involved in that, but at that time, it was very small. Finance Committee had basically Tom Vail, who died at a very young age, 45. He was the clerk, but he was ahead of it. Then you had the Social Security expert. You had the trade expert, who was Bob Best. You had, that was Bill Leonard. You had 4 individuals. That was it. No. So, and that's how you worked it. Now, one thing that Senator Talmadge didn't like also, he didn't like bill numbers. If you didn't say, "How are you going to vote on this bill?" 1722. Bob, what bill
what
is
is
it?
1722?
And so you learn that real quick, and then he'd come in, and I'd send him a memo with the background information, and he'd walk in and he says, "Unless you've worked on a farm, you don't know what this is." But he'd say, "This has more bugs in it than last year's slab pile." You know what that is?
I have no idea what
slab
that
pile
means.
is. It's old lumber timber that's piled up, and when you pull the one board up, the insects are there running around. Another one he would use this is so bad it would make a buzzard gag.
Okay, now that one makes sense.
Yeah.
That one makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're on state. You mentioned coming back to the state and being on phone calls and stuff like that. Senator Talmadge faced a primary challenge in 1968 from
Maynard Jackson.
a young lawyer, Maynard Jackson, who would go on to a long, illustrious career.
Yes.
Did Senator Talmadge take that challenge seriously in '68?
I've been around since I'm in Washington, D.C. I've been around a lot of senators, and obviously they had this saying that the first 2 years of your 6-year session, you're a statesman. The second 2 years, you're a politician. The third year, you're a demagogue. Everyone takes it seriously. It's just not unusual. Every member is frightened all the time. And the important thing is they want to win big. Because if they win big, they have a certain aura about them that they're powerful back home and respected by their peers.
Right.
And so, yes, he did take it seriously.
Do you think that challenge affected how affected's not the right word, influenced how he did constituent services, or focused more on the growing influence of African Americans back in Georgia?
I never did see any difference in treatment of the constituents, whether they were white or black. I remember there was an eminent domain case, and this woman came up from South Georgia because they had taken her home, and what they were offering her was not right. Now this, once again, there's two of us in the office. I'm at the front desk, he's in his office, and this African American comes in, and she had an appointment with the senator, and I, as always, I would go in with the constituent, and he listens to her, and he says, now let me tell you, my assistant here is an expert on eminent domain, and I'd like for you to go tell him what the story. And she says, Senator, I didn't travel all the way up here to see your assistant. I came up to see you. And he started laughing. He started laughing. He said, okay, I'll listen to you. and it was good. And we prepared a good letter, and we forwarded it on to the proper authorities.
Right. So you
He had a good sense of humor, I want you to know.
Well, he what everybody always says about him is, how about this? The perception of him is this sort of slow-talking Southern, lawyer, sort of. But everybody said that was very disarming. Did he ever use that sort of his personality?
He didn't do that.
To
No,
disarm?
he didn't do that on purpose. That was his overall demeanor.
So there was no guile there. That was just him.
I was very close to Senator Russell's staff. I mean, we worked very well, and I obviously he was a senior senator, and so we never did anything that would upstage Senator Russell. And I remember Senator Russell commenting to his staff person who told me about this is they would go to a cocktail party. Let's say it was a Chamber of Commerce in Georgia came up, and it was a big room and everybody's there, and Russell and Talmadge would walk into the room together, and Russell would start talking to somebody, and Talmadge would say hello to somebody, and Russell would still be talking to somebody, and Talmadge had already done the entire room and was leaving, and Russell was still with the same person.
So, I mean, that sort of gets to another question about Senator Talmadge, and how he dealt with people, or what his life outside of the Senate was like. Was he one of the Georgetown set?
Oh, no, not at all, no.
So he liked to spend time at home.
Occasionally, he'd get up early in the morning.
He wanted to go to bed.
Yeah. And occasionally he would. I remember him telling me that he had dinner with John Kennedy and his wife, and saying that, Mrs. Kennedy was a little different. But no, no. His being out was talking to the Georgia Chamber of Commerce when they'd come to Washington, D.C., or the Georgia Farm Bureau delegation coming in. That was his entertainment in the evening. They had a lovely home up on Cleveland Avenue, just off of Reno Road and Northwest. I remember they had a mural of their farm, Lovejoy, on the wall there. No.
So you don't think his career did not suffer at all because he was not part of the hobnobbing and because you hear that so often. It's like, well, back in the day, everybody used to get together for dinner and drinks and cocktail parties and stuff like that.
Within the Senate, they had what they call the Kemet Grill. And Stan Kemet was Secretary of the Senate. At that time, Mansfield was Majority Leader.
Right.
And Stan Kemet was a former colonel, retired colonel from the Army. And about 5 o'clock, those who would enjoy a drink would come to Stan's office. We were never invited. I mean, we weren't. And they would have a drink, and they would socialize.
And this was bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, or is this more Democratic caucus?
I think so. No, I think it was bipartisan. I don't know. For example, in the Senate dining room, they have a wonderful dining room that senators can bring their guests. Then they have the private dining room that none of us ever would enter. I mean, that was strictly for senators. And that's where the Democrats and Republicans would eat together.
See,
it really has changed in that sense. I remember in the Dirksen building going down because my home was only 2 blocks from the Dirksen building, I would go there for breakfast, and sitting there would be Mansfield from Montana, Democrat, George Aiken from Vermont, Republican, and John Williams, Republican, Delaware, talking about activities, events, business. You don't see that.
Why do you think it's this sort of gets to later on in Washington? Why do you think that's changed?
Media.
So you don't think it's money or is there
Media. CNN. Instant information. That's what it is.
so the 24-hour news cycle?
You're covering yourself all the time, and you got to because you never know how the questions are going to come. So you have to be aware of what's taking place. It's media. And is it ever going to change? I doubt it.
Well, we'll get to more of that sort of bright spot down the road in the interview. But 69 rolls around. What prompted your exit from? It sounds like you worked pretty hard for 3 years, long hours, etc.
Well, when at that period of time, if you notice, his first L.A. was the state trooper that worked with him in the governor's office. Then he had that fella from Atlanta who, as I mentioned, would come in at 9 and leave at 4:30, 5 o'clock. And then John Van Sant. And everybody worked 2 to 5 years.
Right.
And so when I was interviewed, he says, and I remember this, I don't want you to leave within 2 years. I don't want you to stay beyond 5 years because I don't believe in someone making a living off the government. That's what he said. And the incentive was how he paid you. Obviously, I got a nice boost from clerking for the judge, but it was, I'll give you an example. At the time, I was making $8,500 a year. My friend who worked for Sam Irvin, his office was on just the next suite of offices. He was making $26,000 a year.
Whoa.
Doing the same thing I was doing, coming in at 9:15, leaving at 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I was making $8,500. Now, when I did leave, I was up to $12,500, but I left to make $25,000.
I asked
Doubled.
and answered.
I doubled it.
Were you ever?
I was not willing to, as he said, I was not willing to have government be my employer.
Well, so what job did you leave for?
Very interesting. Company called Tenneco, which was the 10th largest company in the nation at that time, had 110,000 employees, wanted to buy J.I. Case, which is a equipment manufacturing company. It's now called Case International.
Oh, yeah.
And so they made a run at it, only to find out that a land company out in California called Kern County Land Company owned 67% of J.I. Case. I mean, a land company owning all that. And so in order to get J.I. Case, they had to buy Kern County Land Company, which is, as I said, 500,000 acres of agriculture.
Right.
And they had the Washington, or even in Houston, did not have any agriculture background, policy background. And so I was recruited to join that office.
So what did you apply any of the skills you had learned in the Senate, or was this sort of reaching back to your ag economics days, law degree?
No. It was a combination.
Sure.
Because it was policy, it was agriculture programs, and how legislation worked. Now, I will say Tenneco was very sophisticated. They had the largest pipelines in the nation. They had the largest shipbuilding facility in the nation. They had oil and gas. They had paper company. It was a conglomerate.
Right.
It's just a shell of a company now. But,
so Tenneco is still a going concern?
They're very small, though. Mufflers. It was sad.
I mean, this is sort of beside the point of the interview, but what happened to go from 10th largest company to?
I think it was poor management. But you know, a lot of those conglomerates during the '60s collapsed.
Right, in the 1970s.
ITT, yeah.
You sort of get the deindustrialization of the transfer from the industrial economy to the service economy,
Yeah,
et cetera.
yeah.
So, were you able to? So you stayed in Washington.
Yes.
Were you able to follow Senator Talmadge's career or stay involved?
Oh,
or?
yes. No, I went to different events. I would obviously remained friends with everybody on his staff and remained friends with the committee staff.
So tell me, Senator Talmadge is sort of riding high around the Watergate period where he's on the committee with Sam Ervin, who you mentioned, but he really did fall on very hard professional and personal times in the mid-'70s
Yes.
with the death of his son Bobby.
Yeah. Let me, Bobby when Bobby came to Washington, he would come over. I was a bachelor, and he would come on over to the house, and we would have a beer or two. And Bobby was of concern to the senator because grade-wise, school-wise, he was concerned about Bobby.
Were you able to, when you saw Bobby's death, the alcoholism that became public knowledge after that?
I went to Bobby's funeral. I purposely went down there and visited with the senator just briefly and Betty at that time.
Right.
Just briefly. I did not see, in my tenure with him, I never did see him drunk.
Sure.
Did I see him take a scotch or two? Yes. But I never did see him
But nothing
with
out
that
of the
problem.
ordinary.
Yeah.
Were you surprised about the ethics investigation that came about after his
Well,
very public divorce?
I got entangled in that.
Really?
I had to
All
go.
those years later?
I had to go before 2 grand juries and Senate Ethics Committee staff and appear in the hearing.
I didn't know it reached that far back into the 60s.
The reason for that was when I was with Tenneco for 4 years,
Okay.
and a company which was the largest independent oil company in the world at that time, called Superior Oil Company, wanted to, or they did it. They built the most modern 50,000-acre farming company out in California, part of the Tenneco 500,000, with the idea of transferring that technology worldwide with the idea that they would get mining and oil concessions. And that was my project.
Okay.
And so I traveled from 1973 or 74 until 1978 all over the world working on these projects. We made a contribution to Talmadge's campaign. The chairman did. It was a $500 contribution, and fortunately, it was in American Express checks, not cash, not a personal check, but it was this. And the chairman always carried American Express credit checks because at that time it was very popular. It was 100, and these checks I got the solicitation. We sent the check in. That and several others, Coca-Cola, Parks, who was Commissioner of Agriculture down in with the pesticide company, but he was former Commissioner of Agriculture in Virginia. A bunch of checks went into this bogus account.
The one at the Riggs Bank.
Yeah. And what was interesting was that his chief of staff, who at that time when it blew up was at ITC commission, he was a commissioner. He had called me on Sunday night, and I had bought and sold some houses up on Capitol Hill. And Dan starts telling me, and I don't know why he's telling me this, that he and Shirley had purchased and sold 28 houses up on Capitol Hill. And boy, was I deflated. You know, I had done 3 or 4 at that time, and here this guy's telling me 28.
This is Dan Minshew.
Yeah, yeah. And the next day, this blows up, and I think it was Ed Pound of the Washington Star who released this information. Not about his 28, but about Talmadge's problem.
Right, right.
So I'm not thinking anything of it. I'm not thinking anything of it. And one day I get a phone call from the special prosecutor, the Senate. Could I come by and visit with him? I said, fine, I'll come by and visit with you. And so I go by and visit with him. And he starts grilling me about the $500 that went into this bogus account. Well, how did I know where that's going to go? I didn't know where that was going to go. And so out of that, I then had to go eventually to, and let me share with you, I mean, prosecutors can be really shrewd. The Senate prosecutor says to me at the end of this interview, he says, well, turns to his young associate, he says, well, I guess we'll release this to the press that we just had a meeting with Bob Schramm. I says, wait a minute, what are you talking about? He says, well, you know, it's going to get out eventually. I said, well, one, there's only 3 of us here. I'm not going to tell the press. And I says, have you done this with everybody that's come through here? And they didn't say anything. So that was it. I go to go before the grand jury, which all of us that had the checks, we had to go before the grand jury. The Justice Department prosecutor misrepresents the law, and here you got 24 grand jurors. I mean, sitting out in the audience, because you're up on a stage and you got these 24 sitting there. And I says, you know, you're misinterpreting this law. and it was very interesting how they were out to get him.
Well, and of course, in a grand jury, there's no defense attorney there.
That's right.
It's just
no, but I had to correct the attorney.
District.
Now, incidentally, I had dealings with this fellow later on another matter. I forget what it was, and a very rational individual. But for him to pull that stunt, you know, I found that was unconscionable. I'm glad I was a lawyer and I knew what I was talking about.
He clearly didn't know he was dealing with somebody who beat the Supreme Court in a warrant.
Perhaps, I'm sure I'm on. You know, I'm sure I'm in a file someplace having done that.
Well, so you went before the grand jury. Did you have to go before the actual Senate ethics hearing?
Yeah. Oh, they had a hearing. Yes, they had a hearing. Yes.
So do you remember? I guess Jim Hamilton would have been Senator Talmadge's attorney at the time.
Yes.
What was your recollections of how he worked?
You know, can I share something?
Yeah.
This would never today. This would have never reached where it reached. Would not have.
How do you mean?
Oh, I mean the fact that he got a gift for Talmadge's grandchildren got a trampoline from somebody. I mean, this wasn't Ollie North who accepted a $50,000 security fence around his house. You know, it was like got a box of cigars. I mean, it would have never reached this.
Well, how much of it stem from the sort of salaciousness of finding, you know, fat stacks of cash in overcoats and things like that?
That obviously that was heavy. That was heavy.
Did they ever establish where that money actually came from?
No, none whatsoever. Now, you know, I think about the custom in some rural areas where preachers will get the wealthier members of the congregation will give them cash, something like that. I don't know.
Well, of course,
I never saw any evidence of it.
Obviously, most of that money, you know, that can't be said for certain of the overcoat money, but this is pre-Sunshine Laws, Buckley v. Vallejo. You know,
yes.
It's just that's how donations worked at the time, and very few people kept paperwork, and if they did, they destroyed it after the elections.
Yeah.
So So you went through this process and everything like that. What did you think of the ethics committee's decision to recommend denouncing Senator Talmadge?
I don't think, and rules of evidence, I don't think that would have ever, found him guilty.
Mm-hmm. Well, and obviously that was the decision the Justice Department had made to not bring the criminal charges.
Exactly. You had this Senator Schmidt from New Mexico, who was somewhat of a strange fellow. Stevens was the chairman. Adlai Stevenson's son. He was the chairman.
Adlai the third.
And I remember it really tore him apart.
Mm-hmm.
It did tear him. It did.
Coming out of that, this is 1978, 1979. And of course, the senator's up for re-election, and you had been on staff during a re-election when there was a challenge from Maynard Jackson. Did you expect there to be a challenge to Senator Talmadge and for it to be as potent as it turned out?
In 1980?
Yeah.
Oh, you got to realize what was taking place there. I mean, you had the Republican Party in Georgia was building. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, I'm trying to remember, his Republican opponent in 1968 was Patton, was his name?
Earl Patton.
Earl Patton, that's right, Earl Patton. Earl Patton was, everybody loved Earl. They really liked him. And a lot of people gave him credit for being, creating, after Bo Calloway, Patton came along. And I was told by somebody that Patton really thought he was going to whip Talmadge. and the Republicans went out and took a poll to show him that they didn't want to put a lot of money into this. He was not going to beat him. And the polls were correct.
Right.
But it was changing. You were coming out of Jimmy Carter. Mm-hmm. You had Ronald Reagan, was just very popular. And then you had the problem of the denunciation of Talmadge by the Senate.
Right.
And so, and I got a kick out of the current events going on with Trump, where he was saying, well, when I went to bed, I was winning Pennsylvania, but when I woke up, I lost it. Well, when I went to bed that night, and I was in Houston, I remember, because I got a phone call from one of my friends telling me Herman Talmadge was winning.
Right. Right.
And when I woke up, he lost. And I was told by one of Talmadge's staff assistants, he said he just knew that that suburban area around Atlanta was going to go against him. And he said, if I read what was published, if I read what was published in the Atlanta Constitution about me, I would have voted against myself.
Yeah, he had a notoriously contentious relationship with the Cox media, the Cox papers.
Yep. Yes.
Let's see. So, thinking back on it, Senator Talmadge served in the Senate 1957 to 1981. Very, few 30,000 votes from being reelected to another term. What do you think his legacy was in Georgia politics and policy, for that matter? Well,
he was extremely effective with reference to Georgia's business community, and he was very concerned about what I consider was the poor and low-income people. That was my recollection. I'll give you one case I remember. The Wine Institute came up to visit with him because Georgia had a tax on wine coming into the state that was not produced in the state of Georgia. And they wanted to remove that. And I remember Talmadge saying, he says, I can't support something like that. Here, I got this little small winery over here that's trying to make a living, and the big gallo is coming in trying to do away with this tax to help them. He says, I can't do that, he was very active. He was chairman of the Rural Electric Subcommittee on the Ag Committee, and he was very interested in that, making sure that like we have now,
Like the rural broadband.
the broadband. We now have
Right.
broadband. At that time, it was making sure electricity got
Right.
in rural areas, and he was very interested in that.
Right.
Very interested in that.
So, you got to watch him. What were his strengths and his weaknesses? You've mentioned about how he cared and his constituent services and stuff. Did he have any weaknesses that or things that could have been strengthened to help him?
You could take it two ways. I remember an incident in the Senate Agriculture Committee markup for one of the bills, and Senator Miller from Iowa started talking about peanuts, and Talmadge snapped back and he says, "Jack, you worry about corn, let me worry about peanuts." I'll always remember that. I mean, that was just, the weakness was challenging individuals more, like what I just described. He was a good listener, very good listener, and I appreciated that greatly. And he was always well informed. Strategy-wise, I couldn't describe anything that was weak on that. I mean, he was a strong believer in supporting the chairman in probably 90% of the cases, and he would not openly criticize the person that was advocating something that he didn't support. He might have done it on the side. I do remember one battle we had with poultry, avian leukosis disease and inspection, and the senator from New Mexico, I'm trying to remember his name again, started with an M. After we had the debate, everything was done.
Is that Mo Udall?
No,
He's
no,
Arizona.
No,
Never
no,
mind.
it's Montoya.
Montoya?
Yeah, Senator Montoya, I think it was. We had the debate on the Senate floor because a debate becomes legislative history, and the agency follows the report and the debate. Obviously, the debate is weak, is not as strong as the report, and the report is not as strong as the legislation, but you use both to interpret the legislation, the law. And we had the debate, and the role of the legislative assistant is to go down to the congressional record and correct any of the changes. And Montoyan had changed what he had stated, which I thought was very unethical. He hadn't told Talmadge he was going to do it. And I went to see the senator about it, and he didn't say what he was going to do. I would have been in there saying, go back and change it. But obviously, Talmadge couldn't change what Montoyan said. Montoyan could change what he said. But it did. I don't know if it impacted the program or not.
Sure, sure.
But that's an example.
Well, and this is.
I used to get upset too with a lot of these fellows coming south from the north and visiting with the constituents, giving speeches and everything. I used to get upset about that.
Why was that?
Well, they were down there trying to create controversy,
And you say this as somebody who's from the north who moved down.
Well, no, I'm talking about senators or House members
I see.
from the north coming down into the south.
I see.
And causing, problems. We were not going up to New York City or Boston with reference to busing.
Right, the mid,
Yeah.
the 70s and everything.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the operation of the Senate and how Senator Talmadge respected the process, the chairman's system. What do you think? And of course, this is Bob Schramm's analysis and interpretation. What do you think Senator Talmadge would think of how the Senate operates in 2022, such as it operates?
Oh, I don't think he would appreciate the polarization, in my opinion. I mean, he had great admiration for some of the Republicans, he was very upset with Hubert Humphrey when he changed the filibuster rules.
A timely topic.
Yeah, yes.
But-
He moved it from 67 down to 60
Right.
votes, and he was very upset with that.
But if I recall correctly, Hubert Humphrey was very close with Senator Talmadge and was one of the few senators who made it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I was going to say, go ahead. It looked
No,
like you
no,
had something
Hubert
to say.
Humphrey, everybody liked Hubert Humphrey. I mean, he was just a very gregarious, very polite individual. Everyone liked him.
I believe Rogers Wade said that listening to Hubert Humphrey talk was like listening to a machine gun because he talked so fast.
Yes,
He
yes.
wouldn't let you get in a word because
Yes,
he was always
yes,
talking.
Yes, yes. And you know, it was a heavy time. I remember being invited down to the White House. Senate legislative assistants were invited down to be briefed by McNamara and Hubert Humphrey about Vietnam.
That's
Now you go into an office, you got probably 6 different titles: chief policy advisor, chief of staff, legislative director, legislative assistant, legislative correspondent, legislative staff assistant. It has changed.
and they're probably making more than $8,600 a year.
Well, some of them are starting. No. The legislative council starts off about $25,000 a year. They're not getting rich.
No,
Because you know, there's that budget. Oh, one thing I do want to share with you.
yeah.
He would brag. Senator Talmadge would brag about sending money back to the Treasury. He didn't spend all the money that was given because each office is allocated X
Right.
number of dollars. Okay. I'll remember the second item. Oh, while I was there, up until I left, he never took a CODEL. He never went overseas on a congressional visit.
Oh, like a junket. He
Yeah.
never did.
We call it CODEL, you call it a junket. Never, up until now, I understand near the end he did take a trip to Japan or China, something like that. But during that time, didn't. Felt it was a waste of money.
Interesting. So when did you go into business for yourself?
1984, when Mobil Oil Company purchased Superior Oil Company, I was given the option of going with Mobil, which was somewhat of a snake pit here in Washington, D.C. or
There's a story there.
yeah, or well, it was a problem. Or opening up my own firm, and I had individuals, mentors, advocating that I start my own firm.
So instead of the snake pit, going into business for yourself.
Smart move.
How has government affairs and lobbying changed over the last 3-4 decades?
Let me share with you. I believe that when you have an issue, there's always going to be someone that's going to listen to you, whether it's the legislative branch or the executive branch, if it's a real issue. If it isn't, you're going to have some trouble. It has not changed for my firm or for me. It hasn't. I work on serious issues. Obviously, the COVID has changed radically how it's operating. Really has changed. I mean, there are individuals who haven't been up on Capitol Hill since March of 2020. I mean, it
Right.
hasn't. Since I have left, obviously there's been new rules placed in on with reference to how you have to report what you're doing. And it's somewhat of a trap for a lot of people in the sense that we register everybody, we register on everything, even though we're not going to go up on the Hill, because you never know if there's going to be an accident similar to what happened to Senator Talmadge with his chief of staff, what took place. So we always register because Justice Department's going to use that against you if you haven't registered. And yet no one has interpreted, like the Watergate. A lot of individuals got burned on that. Right now, with January 6th, there's going to be a lot of individuals who are spending a fortune on lawyers. And so if you register and you comply with the law and you go overboard, I think you're providing some insurance for that. But there's a new crew coming in every 2 years, and everybody has to learn. We had this case recently of a member of Congress foolishly received funds that he should not have received. He should have returned it immediately. He didn't send it back until he was questioned, and now was indicted, and trial's going to start in March. And he's a great legislator. Why he did it, I don't know.
So you say a new crew coming in. Is this
Well,
the turnover in the House?
Yes, and no one knows the history of what's taken place here.
It does seem, you mentioned 65, 35 Democrats in the House or in the Senate, and it does seem there's no real stasis anymore. It's wild swings back and forth.
And it's the country. It's the country. It's not Congress.
Mm-hmm.
It's the country. It's the voters, and they're split.
Mm-hmm.
They're split on this. They're talking about 60 new House members coming in. Think about that. 60 new House members times 20. Think of all the new employees coming in, individuals who don't understand political science.
Right, the institutional memory that leaves with the staff turnover.
Yes.
And like that. Well, not to end it on a sour note, but is there anything you'd like to record for posterity? Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I'd just
before we
like
wrap?
to say I think the state of Georgia benefited from Senator Talmadge's service in the United States Senate.
Well, Bob, thank you very much. On behalf of the Russell Library at the University of Georgia, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.